Why was the only medic in the unit the one they trusted the least? The wall in front of her was crumbling, not collapsing, just slowly giving up like everything else out here eventually did. Dust slipped between the cracks as distant gunfire rolled like thunder across the compound. Tessa Harlow didn't move. Her left hand stayed steady, pressed, precise. The decompression needle remained exactly where it needed to be, no deeper, no shallower. Her right hand gripped the radio. Her voice didn't shake. "Eastern wall is clear. I have him stable for now. He needs extraction in 20. Static answered first. Then copy. She didn't respond again. She didn't need to. Because everything that mattered was already happening in silence. The man beneath her, Lieutenant Colonel Warren G., was breathing again. Not well, not safe, but breathing. And that was enough. For now. The strange part wasn't that she had saved him. The strange part was that he had fired her 2 days ago. The paper was still in her pocket. She could feel it every time she shifted. A clean, official dismissal, signed in calm ink by the same man whose life now balanced on the edge of her hands. She didn't think about it. Not now. Soldiers learned to choose what to carry in their minds. And right now, she carried only one thing. Keep him alive. Nothing else existed. Not the blood soaking into her sleeve from her own wound. Not the gunfire echoing beyond the compound. Not the men who had once looked at her like a liability. Just breath. In. Out. Count it. Control it. Hold the line. But it hadn't always been like this. A week ago, she had stepped off a transport helicopter into heat that felt like a physical force. Fob Salerno had greeted her the way places like that always did, indifferently. No welcome. No ceremony. Just a place where people either proved themselves or disappeared into the background. Tessa had been assigned to a recon unit. 8 men. 1 medic. And she was the problem. She saw it immediately. Not because anyone said it. Because no one needed to. The looks were enough. Measured, quiet, already decided. Too small. Too new. Too unnecessary. A medic instead of a sniper. A replacement no one had asked for. She didn't argue. Didn't defend herself. Didn't explain. She had learned early, words rarely changed first impressions. Only time did. Or pressure. Usually both. With support position. That was her role. Rear. Comms. Out of the way. She nodded when they told her. Wrote it down. Accepted it. Because arguing would only confirm what they already believed. That she didn't belong. So she stayed quiet. Listened. Watched. Learned the rhythm of the team. Kowalski the leader, efficient, direct. Briggs loud, confident, already certain about everything. Drummond the one who said almost nothing, but saw everything. He watched her differently. Not with doubt. Not with approval either. Just curiosity. Like he knew something didn't fit. But hadn't figured out what yet. The first time anything changed was almost nothing. A training drill. Heat rising early. The kind that drained you before you realized it. Elray stumbled. Just slightly. No one else noticed. But Tessa did. Because she was always watching. Always counting. Always measuring what others ignored. His step was off. His skin too dry. His eyes just a fraction too slow. That was enough. She moved before he fell. Caught him. Forced him down. No, I'm good. You're not. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Something in it made him listen. Minutes later, an IV line was in. Fluids running. Body cooling. Crisis stopped before it became visible. The others watched. Said nothing. But something shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But doubt in their doubt. The second shift was stranger. Subtle. She almost touched the Barrett. Didn't mean to. Her hand moved automatically, like muscle memory reaching for something familiar. Then stopped. Pulled back. No one else would have noticed. But Drummond did. He always did. And in that moment, something clicked. A question formed. He didn't ask it. Not yet. The answer came too late. It always does. Because 2 days later, she was fired. Just like that. Clean. Official. Final. You are not meeting operational standards. That's what the colonel said. No anger. No insult. Just fact. She nodded. Accepted it. Because arguing wouldn't change it. And because part of her understood. She hadn't shown them anything. Not really. How could they know what she was? So she packed. Quietly. Efficiently. Ready to leave. Like she had never been there. But then, the radio cracked. One word changed everything. Ambush. And suddenly, none of it mattered anymore. Not the paper. Not the decision. Not the judgment. Because someone was bleeding. And that was her world. Why did she go back when she had already been sent away? The vehicle rattled over broken ground, dust rising behind them like a fading memory. Tessa sat still, hands resting lightly on her knees. Medical pack secured between her boots. She wasn't thinking about the dismissal, or the insult, or the quiet relief some of them might feel when she left. She was thinking about Elroy, about the last time she checked his pulse, about whether she had missed something. Because that's what stayed with you. Not the words people said, but the things you might have overlooked. The things that could cost someone their life. Drummond drove. Silent. Focused. Until finally. You've used a Barrett before. Not a question. A statement. She didn't look at him. Yes. How often? Enough. A pause. Then. Best distance. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know. Because saying it out loud changed things. 1,400 meters, clean conditions. The vehicle hit a rut. Neither of them reacted. And bad conditions. 1,200 if the wind talks. Another silence. Longer this time. He nodded once. Not impressed. Not surprised. Just confirming something he already suspected. The firefight came into sound before sight. Sharp. Irregular. Alive. Tessa felt her breathing shift. Not faster. Just deeper. More controlled. Because this was where everything narrowed. Where the world reduced itself to decisions. And timing. And consequences. They found the team pinned. Chaos held together by discipline. Kowalski behind cover. Briggs moving between positions. Elry down. Alive. Barely. Tessa didn't wait. Didn't ask. Didn't hesitate. She moved straight to him. Everything else faded. Noise. Gunfire. Fear. All irrelevant. Because this was the work. Tourniquet. Pressure. Assessment. Vast. Precise. Controlled. You're not dying today, she said quietly. Not reassurance. Not comfort. Just fact. Because she had already decided it. And that was enough. But then, something changed. Not in her. In the situation. Our long gun is down. Kowalski's voice. Tight. Measured. Problem unsolved. We can't reach the roof. That's when the silence inside her shifted. Because she understood what that meant. Someone else would die. Not now. Not immediately. But soon. Unless. She looked at the vehicle. At the Barrett. Then at her hands. One healed. One protected. Her mother's voice surfaced. Soft. Certain. Don't pick up a rifle. Her father's voice followed. Just as quiet. Sometimes you don't get to choose. She closed her eyes for half a second. That was all it took. When she opened them, the decision was already made. Where is it? She asked. And just like that, everything changed. She lifted the rifle. Heavy, familiar, like something she had left behind, but never truly lost. The world narrowed again. Not to fear, not to doubt, but to math, distance, wind, angle, breath. Everything else disappeared. She settled into position, adjusted, aligned, the same way she had done 1,000 times before. Her father standing beside her, saying nothing, because by then, silence was trust. First shot. Miss. She felt it immediately. Wind shift. Tiny, but enough. She adjusted. Didn't rush. Didn't panic. Because panic kills more people than bullets ever will. Second shot. Impact. The shape dropped. Didn't rise. She moved to the second target. Waited. Watched. Breath steady. Trigger smooth. Another fall. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that only comes when danger ends. She stood. Set the rifle down. Like it had never mattered. Like it was just another tool. And turned back to Elroy. Because that was still her job. That had always been her job. Behind her, the team stared. Not cheering. Not celebrating. Just recalibrating. Because the person they thought they knew didn't exist anymore. And the person standing in front of them, they had never really seen before. Why did the man she saved twice never recognize her? Why did the man she saved twice never recognize her? The helicopter hadn't landed yet. And already, everything felt different. Dust spun violently beneath the rotors, slicing the air into chaos. Men moved fast, voices sharp, urgency everywhere. But inside Tessa, there was only quiet. The kind that comes after something irreversible. She kept her hands steady on the stretcher. Colonel Warren lay strapped in front of her, unconscious, pale, alive. Barely. Again. Her fingers adjusted the oxygen line, checked his pulse. Weak. But there. That was enough. It always had to be enough. You did good, someone shouted over the noise. She didn't look up. Didn't answer. Because praise felt misplaced. Like it belonged to someone else. Someone who needed it. She didn't. She had only done what needed to be done. Nothing more. Nothing worth remembering. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. And maybe. Not ever. The medical tent was colder than the outside air. Bright lights, sharp smells, clean chaos. Tessa stepped back as the surgical team took over. Hands moved quickly around the colonel, cutting, stabilizing, saving. She stood at the edge, still, invisible again, like she had never been in the field, like she had never pressed her hands against his chest and forced life back into him, like she had never picked up that rifle. Her fingers curled slightly, not from pain, from memory. She could still feel the weight of it, still feel the recoil, still hear her father's voice. Control the breath, and the rest will follow. She blinked, pushed it away, because that part of her didn't belong here anymore. She had buried it once. She could bury it again. What? He's stable. The words landed softly. Final. Relief moved through the room like a quiet wave. Someone laughed. Another sat down heavily, head in hands. Tessa nodded once, then turned, ready to leave, because her job was done, because staying would only make things complicated. But, Tessa, she stopped, slowly, didn't turn around immediately, because something in that voice felt different. Not command, not correction, something else. She turned. Drummond stood a few steps away, arms crossed, eyes steady. You ever planning to explain that? He didn't need to say more. She knew what he meant. The rifle, the shots, the version of her that didn't match anything they had seen before. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, no, not defensive, not cold, just final. Because explanations came with consequences. And she wasn't ready for those. Not here. Not now. He studied her, longer than most people would, then nodded once. Fair enough. And just like that, he let it go. But not really. Some questions don't disappear. They wait. What? The paper was still in her pocket. She unfolded it that night, sat alone on the edge of her bunk. Read it again. Every word exactly the same. No emotion. No hesitation. You are relieved of duty effective immediately. She traced the signature with her thumb. Colonel Warren G. The same man whose life she had held together with blood and pressure and will. Twice. Once. They didn't even know about. And that was the part that stayed with her. Not the firing. Not the doubt. But the first time. What? It had happened weeks before she ever joined the unit. Different location. Different mission. Same war. She had been attached to another team then. Temporary. Unseen. A name on a roster no one remembered. The convoy had been hit fast. Too fast. Explosive. Then silence. The kind that follows something final. Or something that should have been. She moved through the wreckage without thinking. Because thinking slowed you down. And slowing down cost lives. That's where she found him. Colonel Warren. Pinned. Bleeding out. Alone. No one else had reached him yet. No one else even knew where he was. But she did. Because she listened. Because she watched. Because she noticed what others missed. His breathing was wrong. Shallow. Fatting. Time was already running out. She didn't hesitate. Didn't check rank. Didn't ask permission. She just worked. Hands steady. Mind clear. Stopping what she could. Buying time where she couldn't. You're not dying here, she whispered. Not to comfort him, but to anchor herself. Because sometimes you needed to hear it too. Minutes passed, or seconds. It always blurred in moments like that. Then, voices, other soldiers, they took over, carried him away. Didn't ask who she was. Didn't need to, because she stepped back, like she always did, into the background, into the silence, where she belonged, or where she thought she did. But he never saw her, never knew, never asked, and she never told him, because it didn't matter, because saving someone wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about being seen. It was about the moment, the decision, the action, nothing else. But now everything was tangled. Because this time, they had seen, not everything, but enough. And that changed things, whether she wanted it to or not. The next morning felt heavier. Not louder, not more chaotic, just different. Eyes lingered a little longer. Silences stretched a little further. Kowalski approached her first. Direct. As always. You should still be gone. Not harsh. Not accusing. Just truth. She nodded. I know. A pause. Then, but you're not. Another truth. She didn't respond, because there was no clean answer. Only complicated ones. And complicated answers didn't belong in places like this. He exhaled slowly. Looked at her, not past her this time. At her. We misjudged you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because men like him didn't say things like that easily. She shook her head slightly. No, you didn't. He frowned. Didn't understand. How? She met his gaze. Calm. Steady. Because I didn't show you anything. That was the truth. The real one. Not the version people liked. Not the version that made things feel resolved. Just the quiet, uncomfortable truth. He studied her for a moment. Then nodded. Again. Once. Fair. And just like that, something shifted. Not everything, but enough. But there was still one thing left unresolved. One person. The one whose decision still stood. The one whose signature still sat folded in her pocket. Colonel Warren. Alive now. Stable. And completely unaware. Of everything. Of her. Of the truth that connected them long before he ever dismissed her. And that was the part she couldn't ignore anymore. Because sooner or later, he would wake up. And when he did, he would ask questions. The only problem was, she didn't know if she was ready to answer them. Or if answering them would change everything she had tried so hard to leave behind. What happens when the person who erased you suddenly needs to know who you are? The room was too quiet. Not peaceful. Not calm. Just suspended. Like time itself had paused to wait for something. Tessa stood just outside the recovery ward, fingers resting lightly against the cold metal of the doorframe. Inside, machines hummed in steady rhythm, controlled, predictable. Unlike everything else. He's awake. The words came from a nurse passing by. Soft. Routine. But they landed harder than any gunfire she had heard in the past week. Awake. She didn't move. Not immediately. Because something inside her resisted. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper, something quieter, the kind of hesitation that comes when two versions of your life are about to collide. The one you buried, and the one you're still living. What? You going in. Drummond's voice again. Always calm. Always appearing at the exact moment she wished he wouldn't. She glanced at him briefly. Then back at the door. I don't need to. Not a lie. Not fully. But not the truth either. He leaned against the wall. Watching her, not pushing, not judging. Just present. He might ask who saved him. She exhaled slowly. He already has people for that. Drummond tilted his head slightly. Yeah, but none of them did what you did. Silence stretched between them. Heavy, unavoidable. Because they both knew. This wasn't about credit. It was about something else. Recognition, closure, truth. And all three came with consequences. What? Inside the room, Colonel Warren shifted slightly against the bed. Pain still visible in the tightness of his jaw, in the way his hand instinctively moved toward his side, then stopped when reality caught up. He was alive. That was the first realization. The second came slower, more uncertain. How bad? His voice was rough, dry, controlled. A soldier's voice. Used to pain. Used to not showing it. Bad enough, the doctor replied, but you'll recover. A pause. Then, your team brought you in just in time. He nodded faintly, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. Processing. Reconstructing. That's what people did after moments like that. They tried to piece together the fragments. Make sense of something that had almost ended them. What happened out there? He asked. Ambush. You lost a lot of blood. One of your medics stabilized you before extraction. His brow furrowed slightly. One of my medics. Yes. Another pause. Then, I don't remember. Of course he didn't. People rarely remembered the moment someone saved them. They remembered before. Or after. But not the thin line in between. Not the hands that held everything together. Not the voice that refused to let them go. What? Outside, Tessa heard enough. Just enough. Her grip on the doorframe loosened, then fell away completely. She turned, started walking, because that was easier, because leaving required less courage than staying. But, Tessa, this time it wasn't Drummond. It wasn't quiet either. It carried weight, authority, and something else. Something sharper. She stopped, slowly, turned. Colonel Warren stood at the end of the hallway, supported slightly by a nurse, but standing, barely, his eyes locked onto hers. And for a moment, everything stilled, not because of rank, not because of power, but because of recognition. Not full, not clear, but something, a flicker, like a memory trying to surface. You. The word came quietly, uncertain, but directed. She didn't respond, didn't move. Because this was the moment she had avoided, the one she wasn't sure she was ready for. He took a slow step forward, ignoring the nurse's protest. You were there. Not a question. A feeling. She held his gaze. Calm. Steady. But inside, everything tightened. I'm a medic, she said simply. That was the safest truth. The smallest one. The one that revealed nothing more than necessary. But it wasn't enough. Not for him. Not now. I remember, he paused, searching a voice. Her heart didn't race. It didn't spike. It just shifted. Quietly. Because that meant something had reached him. Something had stayed. Even through pain. Even through unconsciousness. You said something. She swallowed. Almost imperceptibly. Because she knew exactly what he meant. But saying it now, out here, changed everything. I say a lot of things in the field, she replied. Deflecting. Softly. Carefully. He studied her. Longer than expected. Then, did I fire you? The question landed clean. Direct. Like everything about him. She didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. Yes. The truth again. Unfiltered. Unprotected. He nodded slowly. Processing. Accepting. No denial. No defense. Just acknowledgement. Then why are you still here? There it was. The real question. Not about rules. Not about orders. But about choice. About her. She held his gaze. And for the first time, there was something visible in her expression. Not anger. Not resentment. Something quieter. Stronger. Because someone needed help. Simple. Honest. Complete. He exhaled slowly. And something in his posture shifted. Not physically. Internally. Like a piece of understanding had clicked into place. You saved me. Not a question. Not this time. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because silence sometimes carried more truth than words ever could. Drummond watched from a distance. Arms crossed. Expression unreadable. Because this wasn't his moment. It was theirs. And something important was unfolding. Something that had nothing to do with rank. Or authority. Or decisions made on paper. Something deeper. Harder to define. You should have told me, Warren said after a moment. Not accusing. Just reflective. She shook her head slightly. No. Why? Another pause. Longer this time. Because this answer mattered. More than the others. Because it wouldn't have changed anything. That was the truth she had lived by. The one that kept her quiet. Kept her invisible. Kept her safe from expectations she didn't want. Or couldn't carry. He frowned slightly. Disagreed. But didn't argue. Not yet. Maybe it should have. She met his eyes. And for the first time, there was something almost challenging in her gaze. Maybe. But she didn't push it further. Because pushing created cracks. And cracks led to questions. Questions she wasn't ready to answer. The nurse stepped forward again. Sir, you need to rest. He didn't move immediately. Still watching her. Still trying to understand something that didn't quite fit. Then, you're not dismissed anymore. The words were firm. Decided. Final. A reversal. Just like that. She didn't react. Not visibly. Because inside, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight. More expectations. More attention. More reasons to be seen. And being seen was something she had spent a long time learning to avoid. I understand, she said quietly. Not acceptance. Not refusal. Just acknowledgement. He nodded once, then allowed himself to be guided back toward his room. But as he turned, he glanced back, just once, and this time, there was no uncertainty in his eyes, only recognition, not of who she was fully, but of what she had done, and what that meant. What? Tessa stood there long after he disappeared, the hallway empty again, the silence returning, but it wasn't the same silence. Not anymore, because something had shifted, something irreversible. She was no longer invisible, no longer overlooked. And somehow, that felt harder than everything that came before. What? Drummond stepped beside her. Didn't speak at first. Just stood there. Then, "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated, messy, uncomfortable. "I don't know." That was the only honest answer. He nodded, like he understood, like he expected that. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that sounds about right." What? She looked down at her hands. Still steady, still capable, still carrying everything she had done, and everything she hadn't said. Because there was still one truth left, one piece of her past she hadn't revealed, the part that explained everything, the part that connected the medic to the marksman, the quiet girl, to the one who never missed. And if that truth came out, it wouldn't just change how they saw her. It would change everything. What? She exhaled slowly, closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. Clear, focused, because whether she was ready or not, that moment was coming. And when it did, she wouldn't be able to hide from it anymore. What if the truth she buried was the very thing that could save them again? The briefing room felt smaller than usual. Not physically, but in the way tension presses against walls and makes everything tighter. Tessa stood near the back. Same position as always. Same silence. Same distance. But nothing about this moment was the same. Because now, everyone knew. Or at least they knew enough. Colonel Warren stood at the front. Still recovering. Still not at full strength. But present. Because leaders like him didn't stay away when things got complicated. And things were complicated now. "Intel confirms movement along the northern ridge," he said, voice steady despite the strain. "We're looking at a coordinated push." Maps flickered on the screen. Markers, routes, kill zones. Tessa watched quietly, but her eyes weren't following the lines. They were reading the gaps, the spaces between decisions, the things people didn't say out loud. Because that's where the real danger lived. "We'll take the western approach," Kowalski added, stepping in. "Higher ground, better visibility." Heads nodded. It made sense. It was clean, logical, expected. Tessa's fingers tightened slightly against her sleeve. Because something about it didn't sit right. Not wrong, just incomplete. She shifted her weight, almost spoke, then didn't. Because this wasn't her place. Not yet. Not after everything. Not after being invisible for so long. Speaking now would change that. And change came with attention. And attention was dangerous. "Any objections?" Warren's voice cut through the room. Direct, open, but also testing. Silence followed. Predictable. Safe. Tessa looked down briefly. Then back up. The ridge. The wind patterns. The blind spots. Her mind was already calculating. Already adjusting. Already seeing something they were. Something small, something easy to miss, but not harmless, never harmless. She inhaled slowly. Then, there's a secondary wind shift. The words came out before she could stop them. Soft, but clear. Every head turned. Not aggressively, not harshly, just surprised. Because she had spoken. Because she wasn't supposed to. Because she hadn't before. Warren's gaze locked onto hers. Explain. No dismissal. No hesitation. Just attention. Real attention. That felt heavier than anything. She stepped forward slightly. Not fully. Just enough. The ridge creates a funnel, she said, voice steady. Wind won't stay consistent. It'll shift every few minutes. Kowalski frowned. Wind doesn't change the plan. She met his eyes. Calm. It didn't feel like defiance. Just clarity. It does if you're relying on distance shots. A pause. Subtle, but present. Because now, they were all thinking about it. About the sniper positions. About the angles. About the risk. Warren didn't look away. What would you change? That question. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because it meant something had shifted again. Because it meant she wasn't just being heard. She was being considered. She swallowed once. Then, stagger movement, delay exposure, let the wind settle before committing to long-range engagement. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Not dismissive. Evaluating. Weighing. Kowalski crossed his arms. Thinking. Drummond's expression didn't change. But his eyes. They already agreed. Warren nodded slowly. Adjust the plan. Just like that. No debate. No argument. Decision made. And suddenly, Tessa felt it. That weight again. Not pressure. Responsibility. The kind you don't ask for, but can't ignore. After the briefing, the room emptied slowly. Voices lower now. More thoughtful. Less certain. Tessa stayed where she was. Not moving. Not rushing to leave. Because something inside her felt unsettled. Not from speaking, but from what it meant. Because once you step forward, you can't step back the same way. You held back. Drummond again. Always seeing too much. She didn't deny it. Yes. Why? She glanced at him. Then away. Because I wasn't sure they'd listen. He nodded. Fair. Honest. But they did. She exhaled quietly. Yeah. But that didn't make it easier. Because being right wasn't always comforting. Sometimes, it just meant more people depended on you. Walk with me. Warren's voice this time. Behind her. Stronger than before, but still carrying that edge of recovery. She turned. Followed without question. They stepped outside. The air cooler now. Evening settling in. Shadows stretching long across the ground. He didn't speak immediately. Just walked. Hands behind his back. Measured. Controlled. You've done this before. Not a question. A statement. She didn't answer right away. Because this was the line. The one she had avoided. The one she knew would come. Eventually. Yes. One word. Careful. Limited. He nodded slightly. Where? She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to answer, because answering meant opening something. Something she had closed for a reason. Different unit. Doing what? There it was. Direct. Unavoidable. She looked ahead. Not at him. Long-range support. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was full of implications. Of connections being made. Of questions forming. You were a sniper. Again. Not a question. She nodded. Once. Small. But enough. He stopped walking. She stopped too. Slowly. Turned to face him. His expression had changed. Not shocked. Not impressed. Something deeper. Understanding. And something else. Regret. Why didn't you say anything? The same question. Again. But this time, he wasn't asking as a commander. He was asking as someone trying to understand a person. Not a role. Not a file. Her jaw tightened slightly. Then relaxed. Because I didn't want to be that anymore. There it was. The truth. Simple. But heavy. He studied her. Carefully. Why? That word lingered. Because it carried weight. Because it mattered. She looked away. Toward the horizon. Where the light was fading. Because some answers were harder to say when someone was looking directly at you. Because it doesn't leave you, she said quietly. The distance, the silence, the moment before you pull the trigger. Her voice didn't break. Didn't shake. But something inside it shifted. Subtle. Real. You carry it, she continued, even when it's over. He didn't interrupt. Didn't rush her. Because this wasn't information. This was something else. Something closer to truth. I wanted to fix things, she added, not end them. A long pause followed. The kind that lets words settle. The kind that changes how people see each other. Warren exhaled slowly. I misjudged you. She shook her head. Not dismissing. Not rejecting. Just clarifying. You didn't know me. That was the difference. And it mattered. He nodded. Accepted it. Because it was true. Because most judgments came from incomplete pictures. And incomplete pictures rarely told the whole story. Well, you might have to pick it up again, he said after a moment. Not in order. Not yet. Just possibility. She didn't respond. Because she already knew. Because the mission ahead. The terrain. The wind. The angles. It all pointed to one thing. The one thing she had tried to leave behind. Well, night settled fully now. Cool. Quiet. Uncertain. Tessa stood there a moment longer after he walked away. Alone again. But not the same kind of alone. Because now, they saw her. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. And that changed everything. Well, she looked down at her hands. The same hands that had saved lives. The same hands that had taken them. Both truths. Both real. Both hers. She closed them slowly. Then opened them again. Because tomorrow, she might have to choose. Again. Well, and this time, there would be no way to stay invisible. When the shot finally matters, can she still pull the trigger? The wind didn't sound the same at night. It whispered, moved softer, but carried more weight. Tessa lay prone on the ridge, her cheek resting lightly against the stock of the rifle. The world below stretched into shadows and faint movement, just enough to remind her that nothing out there was still. Everything breathed, everything shifted, everything waited. Her finger rested along the trigger. Not on it, not yet. Beside it, the way she had been taught, the way she had practiced for years, the way she had promised herself she would never do again. Wind's unstable, Drummond's voice came through the comms, low, controlled. "I know," she replied. Her tone was quiet, but inside, nothing was quiet, because this moment wasn't just tactical. It wasn't just another assignment. It was a return to something she had buried, something she had walked away from on purpose. And now, it had found her again. Below, Kowalski's team moved in staggered formation, just like she had suggested, just like she had calculated, timing their steps, waiting between movements, letting the wind settle before exposing themselves. They trusted her now. That was the strange part, the part that felt heavier than the rifle itself. Because trust was harder to carry than doubt. Doubt you could ignore. Trust you had to live up to. "You've got two on Overwatch," Drummond said. North edge elevated. Tessa adjusted slightly, her eye narrowing behind the scope. There, movement, subtle, almost invisible, but not to her. Never to her. She tracked the first target, breathing steady, controlled, measured. The world narrowed, like it always did. Not to violence, not to fear, but to focus, distance, wind, angle. Everything else disappeared, even the noise in her own mind. Almost. Her father's voice surfaced again. Soft, unavoidable. "You hesitate, you miss." Her mother's voice followed. "You shoot, you carry it forever." Two truths. Both right. Both impossible to ignore. Her finger shifted slightly, closer to the trigger. Not touching, but ready. "Take the shot," Kowalski's voice cut in. Direct, expectant. Because from his perspective, this was simple, necessary, clean. But for her, nothing about this was simple. Nothing about it ever had been. The target moved, just slightly, adjusting position, scanning, unaware, alive. That word hit her unexpectedly. Alive. Not an enemy, not a threat, not a silhouette. A person, breathing, thinking, existing, just like the one she had sworn to protect. Her chest tightened, just for a second, just enough to matter. Tessa, Drummond again. They're about to spot us. The moment was closing. Vast. No more time. No more space for hesitation. No more distance between decision and consequence. She exhaled slowly. Long. Controlled. Letting everything else fall away. Not the memory. Not the weight. Just the noise. Because clarity was the only thing that mattered now. "I see them," she said quietly. Not to confirm, but to anchor herself. Her finger moved, rested on the trigger now. Light, precise, ready. But she didn't pull. Not yet, because something inside her needed to align. Not just the shot, not just the math. Her, the part of her that had walked away. The part that had chosen to heal instead of harm. The part that still believed. There was a difference. What if there's another way? The thought came suddenly, uninvited, dangerous, because hesitation in moments like this got people killed. Negative, Kowalski said immediately, as if reading her silence. We don't have time. He was right. That was the hardest part. He was right. And still, something inside her resisted. Not out of fear, not out of weakness, but out of conviction, because she had seen what happened when decisions were made too quickly, too cleanly, too easily. She had spent years trying to fix those moments, one life at a time. Her eyes shifted slightly, scanning beyond the primary target, looking deeper, further, because sometimes the obvious threat wasn't the real one. And then she saw it. Movement, lower, closer to the path her team would take. A second position, hidden, better concealed, more dangerous. Wait, she said suddenly. Why? Kowalski snapped. Secondary position, lower ridge, you're walking into it. Silence. Then movement below slowed. Adjusted. Because now, they saw it too. Because now, they trusted her enough to look. Confirmed, Drummond said. 2 more, good catch. Good catch. Simple words. But they carried everything. Because if she had taken the first shot, if she had followed instinct without question, the real threat would have remained. Hidden, waiting, ready. Her finger eased slightly off the trigger. Not fully, but enough. Because this was the difference. This was why she had changed. Not to stop acting, not to refuse responsibility, but to see more, to think deeper, to protect better. With new targets, Kowalski asked. Her breathing steadied again. Calm, clear, focused. Yes. No hesitation this time. No internal conflict. Because this wasn't about ending something. It was about preventing something worse. Her scope shifted, locked onto the hidden position. The real threat. The one that would have cost lives. Her finger settled again. This time, there was no doubt. No hesitation. No second voice pulling her back. Just clarity. And purpose. She exhaled. And pulled. The shot cracked through the night. Sharp. Final. The target dropped instantly. No movement. No return fire. Silence followed. Then, second target moving, Drummond called. She adjusted. Faster now. But still controlled. Still precise. Second shot. Another drop. Another silence. Below, Kowalski's team advanced. Clean. Safe. Unseen. Because the real danger was gone. Because she had seen it. Because she had chosen not just to act, but to understand. Tessa lowered the rifle slowly. Her hands steady. Her breathing even. But inside, something had shifted again. Not broken. Not lost. Just different. Because this time, she hadn't just taken the shot. She had chosen it. Fully. Clearly. Without being pulled by fear or memory. Without running from what it meant. You just saved all of us, Kowalski's voice came through. No hesitation. No doubt. Just truth. She didn't respond. Because she didn't need to. Because the moment spoke for itself. Drummond's voice followed. Quieter. Closer. You're not running from it anymore. Not a question. A realization. She looked out over the ridge. The darkness. The stillness. Then down at the rifle in her hands. Her reflection faint in the metal. No, she said softly. And for the first time, it felt true. What? But as the team regrouped below, as the mission moved forward, as everything seemed, for a moment, under control, a new thought settled in. Quiet, unwelcome, unavoidable. Because this wasn't over. Because it never really was. And because somewhere out there, something bigger was moving. Something they hadn't seen yet. What? Tessa lifted her head slightly, eyes scanning the horizon, listening, not just to the wind, but to the silence behind it. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing was what you didn't notice in time. When everything is finally clear, what does she choose to become? The morning didn't feel like victory. It felt quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles after something important ends, but before anyone decides what it meant. Tessa stood at the edge of the ridge, the rifle resting beside her boots. The sun rose slowly, light spilling across the terrain in soft gold, revealing what the night had hidden. Tracks, spent shells, stillness, no movement below, no threats, no urgency, just the aftermath. Behind her, voices carried faintly, Kowalski's team regrouping, checking positions, confirming what they already knew. They were safe. Because of her. Again. But this time, it felt different. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just clearer. She looked down at her hands. No blood this time. No frantic pressure. No race against time. Just stillness. Control. Joyce. That word stayed with her. Joyce. Because for the first time in a long time, she hadn't been forced into anything. She hadn't reacted. She had decided. And that changed everything. What? You always come out here after. Warren's voice. Calm. Stronger now. Not fully recovered. But close enough. She didn't turn right away. Sometimes. Not entirely true. But close enough. He stepped beside her. Looked out over the same view. Same silence. Different perspective. You ended it clean, he said. She shook her head slightly. No, I stopped something worse. That mattered. That distinction. Because one ended things. The other prevented them. He nodded slowly. Understanding the difference. Respecting it. Either way, he said, you made the call. A pause. Then. And you didn't hesitate. She exhaled quietly. Because that wasn't entirely true. She had hesitated. She had questioned. She had looked deeper. But maybe that wasn't weakness. Maybe that was the point. I hesitated enough, she replied. He glanced at her. Curious. Enough for what? She met his eyes. Calm. Certain. Enough to make sure it mattered. Silence followed. Not empty. Not uncertain. Just accepted. Because some answers didn't need explanation. But they stood there for a while. No rank. No orders. Just two people trying to understand something bigger than either of them. You know, Warren said eventually, most people don't come back after being dismissed. She gave a faint nod. I wasn't most people. A hint of something almost like a smile touched his expression. Brief. Gone just as quickly. That's becoming clear. Behind them, Kowalski approached, Drummond just a step behind. The rest of the team scattered nearby. Not crowding, not intruding, just present, waiting, because something unspoken was happening, something that needed to settle. Kowalski stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, posture relaxed. But his eyes, they were different now. No doubt, no distance, just recognition. "We're moving out in an hour," he said. "Command wants a full report." Tessa nodded once. "Simple. Expected." Then, "You're staying with us." Not a question. Not even an order. A statement. She looked at him, then at Drummond, then briefly at Warren. Because this was the moment. The one that mattered more than any mission. More than any shot. More than any decision made in the field. Because this wasn't about survival. This was about direction. About identity. About who she chose to be now. "What? I was already reassigned," she said quietly. The paper still in her pocket. Still real. Still official. Warren stepped forward slightly. "That's been corrected." Of course it had. He had the authority. The power. The ability to undo what he had done. But this wasn't about paperwork anymore. She felt it. Deep. Certain. Because going back wasn't the same as moving forward. "I know," she said. And for a moment, no one spoke. Because they all understood something was coming. Something that wasn't simple. Something that couldn't be decided for her. What? She looked down at the rifle again. Then at her hands. Then out at the horizon. All the versions of herself standing there at once. The medic. The sniper. The quiet observer. The one who acted without being seen. The one who could no longer hide. She inhaled slowly. Then exhaled, letting the answer settle. Not rushed. Not forced. Just chosen. "I'll stay," she said finally. Kowalski nodded immediately. Like he expected it. Like he trusted it. But she wasn't finished. Her eyes lifted. Met his. Then Warren's. Then the rest. "But not the way I was before." A slight shift. Subtle. But real. "What does that mean?" Kowalski asked. Her voice didn't waver. Didn't soften. Didn't hide. "It means I don't stay in the back anymore." Silence. Then, "It means I speak when something's wrong." Another pause. Longer this time. Because this was new. Because this was different. Because this wasn't the quiet medic they had met a week ago. This was someone else. Someone clearer. Stronger. Not louder. Just present. "And it means," she continued, "I decide when I pick up the rifle." That one carried weight. Because it wasn't refusal. It wasn't rejection. It was control. Ownership. Balance. Warren watched her closely. Then nodded once. Fair. No argument. No pushback. Because he understood. Because leadership wasn't about forcing people into roles. It was about knowing where they stood strongest. Kowalski exhaled slowly. Then gave a short nod. "All right. Simple. Accepted. Done." What? Drummond stepped forward slightly. A faint, almost invisible smile at the corner of his mouth. "Took you long enough." She glanced at him. Just briefly. Then, "Yeah." Because it had. Because finding your place wasn't always about where you started. Sometimes it was about what you were willing to face. When the team began to move, packing, preparing, resetting, another mission would come, another moment, another decision. That was the nature of it. Endless, unpredictable, real. Tessa picked up the rifle, held it for a second, then secured it. Not as a burden, not as a weight, but as a tool. One part of who she was. Not the whole. Never the whole. She adjusted her medical pack next. Checked its contents. Everything in place. Everything ready. Because that part of her would always come first. As they started down the ridge, the wind picked up again. Soft, constant, uncertain. But she didn't fight it. Didn't resist it. She moved with it. Steady, focused, clear. Because now, she understood something she hadn't before. Strength wasn't in choosing one path over another. It was in knowing when to walk each one, without losing yourself in either. Behind her, the ridge faded into distance. Ahead, the road stretched forward. Unknown, unwritten, real. She didn't look back, because she didn't need to. Because everything she had been, everything she had done, was already part of her. Not something to escape, not something to erase, just something to carry. The right way. And as the sun rose higher, casting light over everything, a quiet thought settled in her mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who learn how to hold both sides of themselves and still move forward. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.